So today we're going to talk about FireSmart and why it is important. The first thing I wanted to make clear is FireSmart is not about stripping the land of trees. Instead, it is about learning how to live safely with the trees in the urban forests and the urban environment, or as FireSmart likes to call it, the WUI, which stands for Wilderness Urban Interface. We will also look over how to assess your home by looking at some of the basic risks and what you can do to mitigate these risks with various small steps. I know some of these suggest, oh, what's happening here? Are we okay? Or is maybe I'm just too far away. I know some of these suggestions may seem daunting, but we are not looking for perfect. We're just looking for better. Baby steps, if you will. So, how do we do that? Of course, there we go. First, does Delta have a wildfire risk? Does your house have a wildfire risk? And how big is the wildfire risk? And what can I do about it? And then is there help? So we'll go through all of those questions sort of one by one. So first, does Delta have a wildfire risk? Yes, for the most part we do. This is an aerial shot of Delta, probably changed a little bit since then, a few more high-rises. But you can take a look and you can see North Delta's got a number of, so we've got Watershed Park here, Burns Bog, and then of course down here we've got the Tsawwassen area and Beech Grove and Point Roberts. So there is sufficient amount of forest around where a little spark can cause significant damage. Next question, does your house have a wildfire risk? Well, this really depends on your house and several factors, which is why they've come up with this home assessment scorecard. And this is from FireSmart BC. A local LFR can help you with that, or you can just download the form yourself. So we'll just go through how this form works. So basically, first of all, you take a look at, what it is, it's rated from whatever it says right here. So 0 being an ideal situation where there's no risk, 30 being when there's some level of risk. So in this case, if we've got wood shakes on the roof, then that gets a 30. If you've got fire resistant like metal or clay, then you get a 0. So there's nothing in between. So in this case, 30. Next, combustible gutter with debris. So if your gutter has debris in it, that is problematic. The embers can light that on fire, and then your house, we'll get into embers a little bit later on. And so that's 16. Combustible vents, not fire rated or without 3 millimeter screening minimum, or maximum, I guess. So then they take the total score of that, and then if you take a look here, we've got what the points mean, whether you're low risk, moderate, high, or extreme. And in this case, they're 52, which they're above 35, so that's high. We know. So next one is, how big is my wildfire risk? Well, once again, that really depends on a number of factors. Structure fires are normally suppressed by firefighting resources. They're fairly, I don't want to say fairly common, but they're easier to control than a wildfire. Not super easy, but at least it's sort of located in one place as opposed to spreading out as wildfires do. Interface fires frequently overwhelm all available firefighting resources, and here's an example of the Kelowna fire of, 2003. 240 homes, $150 million lost. And this next one wasn't in the original slide, but I tossed it in because I grew up in Kamloops and my parents were in Barrier during the McClure fire. It was all started by a cigarette butt being tossed out. The guy who threw it out, or who put the cigarette butt on the ground, it was his property, and he tried to put it out, but he just could not because it burst into flames so fast. So 72 homes, 9 businesses, 180 jobs, once again, $150 million. Slave Lake, 354 homes, 800 million. And not to be outdone, Fort Mac. That was a big one, although there's been big ones since. California is another example, but 100 homes, 3.6 billion in losses. And I do have a video of this later on. So what can be done about it? So this is where a FireSmart science comes in play. So here we have two identical homes subjected to identical ignition sources, man-made ember storm. The difference is the use of less flammable building materials in one. In this case, the siding as well as elimination of ignition sources beside the home. So if you take a look, the siding on the right-hand side is not cedar shake, the left-hand side is cedar shake. If homes don't ignite, homes don't burn. The main issue is structural vulnerability. What did I have on my notes? Oh yeah, back to the homes don't ignite, homes don't burn. How are buildings ignited by wildfire? Radiant heat is one of the ways. Like the warmth from the sun, it spreads out from the fire and dries nearby plants, making them easy to ignite. Convective heat, much like convection stove, is carried by hot air. It moves around and quickly heats up the nearby plants, helping the fire spread faster. Both types of heat help forest fires grow and spread. The second major cause of building ignitions from wildfire is firebrands. They're also called embers. Embers are carried by wind. Extreme fires can create their own wind, resulting in what is called a firestorm, which is what happened in Kelowna more recently. Embers land on buildings, decks, or in the yard. Beside a building where dry grass, small trees, wood piles, and other combustible materials can be ignited. 50 to 90% of buildings are ignited by wildfires are actually ignited by embers or firebrands. And here we go. So live fire experiment. An exterior wall ignites much like this duplex example. Here they have many studies done on the topic. 3 structure walls were positioned at 10, 20, and 30 meters from the fire's edge. The purpose being to determine the safe distance for fire to flame, or basically heat sources. So 3 out of 5 tests using, what were they using on this one? Radiant heat only, with no flame contact. 10 meters away, the wall sections received scorch. 20 meters away, the wall sections received no scorch, so nothing happened. They didn't light on fire. 30 meters away, absolutely nothing, of course. So basically, at 20 meters away, your house is pretty much safe from radiant heat, depending on other factors as well. So next, they looked at convective heat. And once again, they did the 10, 20, and 30 meter test. And okay, one of the takeaways from this research is that large flames and heat generated by wildfires are surprisingly ineffective at igniting structures located fairly close to the large flames. So why do they burn? So here we've got a motorcyclist. This is all dash cam footage from Fort Mac fire. They're evacuating, and if you take a look on their right-hand side, our left-hand side, you can start to see some pretty massive flames. And as we're moving along, those flames are actually growing really quickly. Like they're, the size of the trees now it's hit the top of the trees. So now they're flaring up. This is, once it hits the treetops, then you're really start to spread fast. And we're really only at a couple of minutes in, even a minute in, so that guy is trying to get out, and just watch the motorcyclist. As he's driving along, you'll start to realize once the flames get even hotter. Like, they haven't even really hit the residential area yet. And they're really, so now he's starting to feel the heat. And there's actually audio on this, but it's muted, which is probably a good thing. So I think this is where we're starting to move into the residential area. Yeah. And so take a look at the size of those flames. They're monstrous. And as of yet, the houses are not burning, because you've got 10 meters from basically the flames to the side of the road, 10 meters across the road, and then 10 meters to the house. So you're within 30 meters. And you can actually start to see embers flying there, and they're hitting the grass. This guy's obviously getting out of there. Had to go up on the sidewalk. Everybody's driving into the oncoming lane because they want to get away from the flames because of the amount of heat. Still, the houses are not burning. And if you take a look at the size of those flames, you would think that the houses would catch fire. And even the trees, like you take a look at the deciduous trees on the side, they're not burning either. But if you do take a look, you can see one hedge right here that's been hit by flames. I can't remember what tree it is, but they've got that. And then, of course, this one is also hit. That's a cedar hedge. And now look, the trees, they're completely out. They're almost out at this stage. That fire moved incredibly fast. The main fire is not there for long, but this is still burning, which is, we'll get into the whole reasoning behind that shortly. And there we go, the house is gone. But the neighboring houses aren't. And they were subjected to the same amount of heat. So, this is the start of the video where what we just saw. The fire is off to the side, but approaching fast. There are a few spot fires which have jumped across the road, and these people are just trying to get out. For reference, this is 1 minute and 38 seconds into the video. So that's kind of an important factor there when we further go on. So once again, as I said, 30 meters away, and there's really nothing in between for the most part. That is a fuel that would carry the, act as a bridge between the flames and the homes. So this is where FireSmart has divided the risks into zones. So the first zone is 10 meters, second zone is another 20 meters away, and then the zone 3 is 30 meters away. This is just done for the purposes of the test that we did, the home analysis test. Okay, considering the flames are over 30 meters away from these homes and there's no significant fuel between the flames and homes, one wonders, why did they burn? What ignited the Beacon Hill homes? Lower left is substantial radiant heat, as you can see by the size of the flames. The upper right photo shows the convective heat, and although it's very impressive, the homes didn't burn. There was no flame contact. So if not radiant or flame contact, what was it? Here we see a seat cushion which was hit with, what was it? A dozen? Yeah, basically it was hit with a dozen embers. But the Fort Mac fire, they estimated, had 604 meters squared, which is over 6 million embers per hectare. So that's a lot. But yet, that cushion didn't burn in the flames, but houses did. So why? And here's the answer. It's basically embers will burn out quickly, and if they don't have anywhere to land, or landing on a pillow, the pillow is not going to burst into flames that quickly. A house isn't going to burst into flames when a tiny little spark hits it. They need to gather up in quantity, and they need to be in an area where they will actually light something else on fire. So, under chairs, that kind of stuff. So in this case, we see the steps here. They're a perfect source or area for the embers to catch, and that's why the stairs caught fire. And then on the bottom, we see the final result of that. And so this is what the ember storm looks like. You can see it on the ground. It's really, and that's 1 minute and 32 seconds away. So, and that's from the front dash camera of another car, I guess. So this is the deciduous hedge that was the ignition point number 1, we saw that, and then the second one is where it actually, the small pine that burned the house. And so here we see it 2 minutes and 19 seconds in, when there was nothing going on, to now the trees are gone. They're just sort of burning away a little bit, but the house is about to catch fire. 30 seconds later, the house is caught fire. The small pine turned into a big fire, and there's the final result. These pictures illustrate the actual length of time So 144 peak intensity, 219 reduced intensity, 246 the lowest intensity. But yet, like we see, the bushes are still on fire. So this is the pre-fire aerial view of the area that we were just driving through, and you can see where the car was during those times. So they're driving fairly slow, and that's after. Quite a difference. And take a look, we see, this is interesting because those trees there survived. So like I said, it's not about chopping down trees, and this house survived, but these ones didn't, and those ones didn't. It's because that house did not have a cedar hedge sitting in front of it. Really that simple. Solving the problem depends on what happens before the fire, on our homes and in the forests beside them. So this is where FireSmart kicks in. They've got a neighborhood champion program, which I'll get into. It's sort of like Block Watch for FireSmart. So this is where it gets a little bit confusing, because where they used to have 3 zones, they decided in their wisdom to split the first zone into what they now call the what are they calling it? The immediate zone, which is 1.5 meters from your home. That is the most critical area that you need to look at. And so let's look at that now. So what you can do within that particular, those zones. Minimize potential ignition sources in non-combustible zone and zone 1. So the 1.5 meters as well as up to 10 meters reduces the intensity and slows the advance of fires. Same thing goes for the further ones. So now this is actually going to explain it a little bit better than me.
As we continue to extend our lifestyles and communities into the forested and grassland areas, we become more exposed to the dangers of wildland fire. Even so, it is possible to live safely and resiliently with wildland fire. FireSmart principles mitigate a home's vulnerability by taking proactive action on our properties to reduce wildland fire risks. By addressing the home ignition zone, which includes the condition of the home out to 30 meters from its perimeter or any attached structures, you can reduce the potential for home ignitions. The residents of Aspen Street are taking proactive steps on their properties.
Hi, I'm Levi. We must reduce wildland fire risk in our neighborhood. I've created a 1.5 meter non-combustible surface in the immediate zone around my entire home. By clearing the vegetation and combustible material, including under my deck, down to bare mineral soil, and enclosed the underside of the deck.
Hi, I'm Sandy. The intermediate zone is between 1.5 and 10 meters from your home. To discourage fire from reaching our home, we moved combustible material like firewood out to the extended zone. We moved our patio furniture and renovation materials into the shed and plan to use fire-resistant landscaping products in our yard.
Howdy, I'm Colin. I've hired a professional arborist to work in the extended zone, which is 10 to 30 meters from our home. They will thin our trees so they are 3 meters apart, crown to crown, and prune them to 2 meters from the ground to create a fire break and prevent it from climbing into the trees.
Hi, I'm Marie with the local fire department. The residents of Aspen Street made great FireSmart choices in their home ignition zone. Properties that extend beyond 30 meters need to keep applying these same principles, like pruning remaining conifer trees and clearing up dead and woody debris. The guidance of a forest professional on appropriate management options and thinning practices is also recommended. In subdivisions like Aspen Street, priority zones can overlap. It is important to talk to your neighbors and identify ways that you can work together.
We've taken small actions on our properties. Together, we can accomplish much more. We should visit the FireSmart Canada website to find out how we can get involved in the Neighborhood Recognition Program and increase our neighborhood's resilience to wildland fire. Agreed?
Agreed.
So anyways, back to the story about 64th and Scott Road. There was a construction site across the street, and in the middle of the night, one of the buildings caught fire and embers flew across the road, and a number of roofs were destroyed because there's a lot of cedar shake in that neighborhood. Clay, metal, concrete, tile, asphalt, shingle, unrated wood shakes are not good, and they're a fire hazard. Hazard factor number 2, roofs and gutter cleanliness. Use non-combustible gutters, keep them clean, clear tree needles, debris, and overhanging branches from the roof. Debris gives embers easy fuel to ignite, and hanging branches act as a conduit for flames, particularly if the branches are highly flammable, like cedar, and touching the ground as well, which is where that 2.5 meter thing kicks in. Fires typically spread on the ground, but get really dangerous when they crown into the trees, like we saw with the Fort Mac fire 2 minutes in. Hazard factor number 3, something that most people don't think about, is vents and openings. Vents are important because they allow trapped moisture to escape from attics so that you don't get a moldy home, but they should be made out of non-combustible material. And again, we were talking about the 3mm screening. Wildfire ignition research also doesn't recommend gable or cupola vents since they provide a place for embers to gather. Hazard factor 4, eaves. Open eaves are not good because they provide, once again, a way for the embers to enter into the home. Cover them with mesh is a good idea. Earlier on I mentioned cedar roofing. Of course, the siding on the house is also drastically affects the ability for embers to ignite your home. The easier it is for the materials to catch fire, the more likely the home will catch fire, either by radiant convection or most likely ember spread. Non-combustible material, again, hardy board, that type of thing. Wood and vinyl is combustible. Here's an example of what happens to vinyl. It completely melted, and then you see below there's an image of a woodpecker, and the damage it does, and that's another place for flames to enter into your home. Hazard factor 6 addresses the conditions on the exterior of the home. Gaps or cracks, like the woodpecker hole. Unrated wood shake siding, irregular surfaces where wind-driven embers can stick is also a problem. Hazard factor 7 is ground to siding clearance. So if you take a look, 15 centimeters is ideal. And then in this next picture, you can see where it starts out at 15 centimeters, but because of the slope, all of a sudden it's closer, and then you've also got the issue of that little overhang space where embers can also hit the house. Decks and porches are another risk, particularly if you have stuff underneath and if there's cracks in between. Structures located in mid to upper portions of hills, that's why they have setback rules when you build on a hill. If you're up on a hill, that's where the flames are going to go. They go up. So a taller building requires a further setback. Windows and glass, this one kind of makes sense. Small windows are better protection, larger windows are easier to break. So once the heat gets hot enough and shatters the glass, the flames are going to enter your home. Tempered glass is the best way to go. And then the 1.5 meter combustible zone is what we're going to go to next. Previously it was the immediate zone. So can you tell me what's wrong? Like with this picture, it's basically, if you take a look, 1.5 meters from the structure is gravel. You got it. And there's also a planter on the side as well, where if you take a look at where is it? Oh yeah, it's much easier to see there than on my screen. That planter there, beside there also is a good place for flames to catch. Then of course there's wood piles underneath decks or roofs, particularly, especially if they're right next to the home, which a lot of wood piles are. Outbuildings not meeting the guidelines. They need to be 10 meters. If the outbuilding is basically built out of wood, like a wood shed, it should be more than 10 meters from the home, or it needs to be FireSmart. Forest vegetation, trees. Here's the one that really kind of gets me, is the pyramid cedars that you see around everywhere. I actually contacted the city of Delta to find out whether they had a policy on relating to FireSmart and bushes that they plant, and they don't. Well, they didn't. More recently, I sent a letter off, and then more recently I spoke to Guy McIntosh, the chief, and similar issue for him. He's concerned about it, but they did make some changes. In this case, they said for water conservation. So whether it's not, even though it's not for the exact reason that we're talking about here, at least they're starting to reduce the uses of those hedges, but they still have them and they still put them in. Coniferous trees like evergreens, spruce, fir, cedar, they're highly combustible. Deciduous trees like leafy poplar, birch, and aspen, they're lower combustible because the leaves just burn quickly. Whereas with the coniferous, there's a lot of oils in there, a lot of terpenes, and they will burn for a long period of time and actually help the wood catch fire. This slide is inserted as an example of the flammability of different types of wood. So if you take a look, there's a deciduous stand right there. That's it's got an arrow. So the deciduous aspen stand, it survived, but if you take a look to the right, the coniferous trees did not. Any coniferous or mixed wood located 1.5 to 10 meters from the home is a higher hazard. Any deciduous located 1.5 to 10 meters from the home is a lower hazard. So, actually coniferous, yeah. So, you're better off using deciduous, but the thing is, any wood will burn. It's just a matter of what's underneath it and what helps it burn. Cedar hedges, for example. Surface vegetation, which is basically what I was referring to. A lot of these trees, I've got a maple in front of my house that has a cedar hedge underneath it. And that hedge constantly gets dry needles in it. I'm actually at the point now where I'm just gonna cut it out because it's just too much of a risk. Long grass is also a problem. Anything that, and that's really how California burned, was grass. Forest vegetation and trees, once again, zone 2. And like I said, we're not looking for perfect, just better. And this is an example of how the scorecard will do that. I'll go back. Coniferous trees are more flammable, making sure they spread out and the branches are not touching the ground helps. So if they're not as close together, that's a good thing. If they're overlapping, then that's a 30-point thing, and basically it's a fail on that end. Flammable shrub spacing. If they're spaced out far apart, they're not as bad, particularly if there isn't anything underneath where they, like cedar chips, that they can spread on. Surface vegetation, I think that's repeating itself. Accumulated needles and branches and logs. If they're scattered, it's a lower hazard. If they're stacked on top of each other, once again, embers can spread in there and catch them and they'll burn each other. Low-lying tree branches, that's where the 2-meter surface to tree branch is a good indicator. So you don't have to chop the trees down, just trim back the branches so they're 2 meters off the ground. And looping back to the final big question, is there support? So earlier on I mentioned the community champions, or I can't remember what they're calling it, which is basically like a block watch for FireSmart. And they've also got the kids education program. So if there's any teachers around, if you know any teachers, they do have a program for schools. They've got a program for libraries. I was hoping to get the library here. They wanted to, but they couldn't find any volunteers, unfortunately. And Ember is available in a lot of cases through the local LFR, which I'm one of them, which is how I managed to get it. And interestingly enough, that's why one of the reasons I joined FireSmart, because I have a block watch group in my neighborhood in Sunshine Woods. And I asked the fire department how I would get Ember the Fox to, come to the barbecue. And they said, well, we'd have to do that. And well, we can't find anybody to wear it, which is understandable. So that's when I called FireSmart and said, how do I get the Ember the Fox to come out to my events? And they said, well, it has to be an LFR. Well, how do I become an LFR? So here I am. So it was all about a costume. Well, and $1,000. Actually, the $1,000 came later. That was a little nice add-on to help. In this case, I think they gave me $500 for this event. And then thanks to other sponsors, it was paid for. So where did I get? So what does it do? It brings recognition, awards, rebates, and in some places, it's almost mandatory. For example, in Whistler, there's areas where you can't even get insurance unless it's FireSmart rated. And I think I was talking to one builder where the city was requiring a FireSmart inspection in new construction. And then being recognized as an recognized neighborhood can actually also help you get funding. Hello, go ahead, have a seat. So we're just talking about the FireSmart and the various recognition programs that they have and how it can help get funding. So first of all, you identify a neighborhood champion, form a FireSmart committee. So the neighborhood champion is like a block watch captain. Then have a hazard assessment done by the fire department, develop a mitigation plan, teach the residents how to do it, and then celebrate. So you can have a barbecue and have it paid for. And once that's all done, that's where you get your money. FireSmart committees need to host a FireSmart event annually to obtain and maintain their recognition status. That's a barbecue. But it's actually a very easy portal to use. And then once you're registered as a neighborhood champion, you have access to all sorts of resources. This is, once you're registered, you get access to the portal. You can have access to the volunteer sign-up sheets, training, assessment forms, the whole shooting match. Okay, and then if you have any questions, you can contact the FCNRP at firesmartbc.ca for portal support. If you've got any other questions, you can contact myself, or if you go to FireSmart BC, you can take a look for the local FireSmart representatives, the LFRs. I believe, I don't know if it's Dave Ayton anymore that is an LFR, but there's a couple of people from the fire department. I'm in there. I prefer to keep my level of involvement to educational events and trying to bring FireSmart as an add-on to Blockwatch, which is really why I'm doing this, because having run a Blockwatch group, neighbors have different needs, and my neighbors came to me and said, we want the fire department to come out. We're scared. We're worried about living up against a forest. And so it really opened up a lot of resources, and Ember the Fox, and funding as well. So it's a great way to just it's sort of unofficial, but just create your own little neighborhood group.